Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Not just me, but Bryce Coutts as well from the HawkZone Rundown podcast. Always good to have you, Bryce. How you been, buddy?
Good, Dan. How are you?
Good. So we would just jump right into this, and just get into it. Happy Saturday, everybody. My God, Sunday. I haven't known what day of the week it is for like the last 3 months. I'm not sure what's going on. Are you excited for training camp? We're almost there. I'm excited for Tuesday because then we'll be able to say this month training camp opens. But I mean, we're 3 weeks away, right?
Yeah, no, I'm super excited for this training camp and just seeing all the different things that occur.
Yeah, and hopefully some news between now and then. I don't know. It's, we got the Shaq Griffin signing last week. You and I haven't really chatted since then. What do you think of that?
It's depth. That's how I look at it. It's a depth signing piece, and I look at it in the sense of you're trying to find the back end of the Seahawks secondary and the cornerback. You've lost some of that with Artie Burns signing away and so on.
By the way, sorry, I see the message there from Seahawks fan about the echo. I had echo cancellation turned off. Should be fine now. Yeah, it was fun to have something different to talk about, but it didn't really move the needle much for me. I think there was a little bit of overreaction. I think some fans thought that it might impact Devin Witherspoon's role. But yeah, I just think it's really good, solid depth. And the thing I like the most about it, for all my frustrations with Shaq during his 4 years in Seattle of just not making enough plays on the ball, great locker room guy, good run defender who seems to have leaned into that part of his game. His PFF grades anyway from last year in Minnesota were his best ever as a run defender and as a tackler, like an 82 tackling grade. So that had to have some appeal to Mike McDonald, certainly, especially given, Josh Job's not the biggest guy in the world. Reek Woolen's had his issues with tackling, although I think a lot of those were kind of injury related. So today we're going to talk about bold predictions, though. And I don't know, I hesitated to use the word bold because I think sometimes what follows the phrase bold predictions are ridiculous, clickbaity, just stupid predictions. And I thought about calling it that. Like, what are the dumbest predictions we could come up with? I think now that you've sent me yours, and we did these separately, and then you sent me yours, there is some overlap, and we'll hit that right off the top. But I think we were kind of on the same page, and we tried to keep these more on training camp. Certainly, the week between the last preseason game and the beginning of the regular season, we'll do a bold prediction show for the regular season, but that would be kind of an exercise in futility, I would think, at this point, this far out. Before we get started, by the way, if you haven't already, subscribe to the show, hit that thumbs up button. All the other ways you can support the show and the channel are listed down below. Get over to Bryce's channel as well. He and Ryan over on HawkZone Rundown, subscribe to their channel if you don't already. And also, if you didn't see it on Twitter today, the Substack is up and running now. posted my first piece over there. Been meaning to get back into writing for a little bit now. Kind of felt the juice flowing again to do that. And so the first piece today, a little bit of an origin story, just kind of how a little bit about my biography and kind of my background and how I got to this point, but also some cool things that sort of happened along the way that led us to where we are today. So check that out. That is linked down below as well. And this is my first subscriber. So thanks, Bryce.
Yeah, well, I'll always subscribe to your stuff, Dan. I was really looking forward to when you decided to do this writing piece again, just because I never got to experience, you when you were in the whole industry and everything, and now you've kind of stepped in. So I'm really excited to be able to read what comes out of your thoughts after a game rather than just always hearing them.
I'm excited about it. I got burned out. I touched on this a little bit in the piece. I got burned out writing, having to do it basically every day when I was co-editor of 12th Man Rising with Keith Myers. And then I wrote for Corbin Smith's SI site for a while. And before that, it was NFL Mocks. And it was like having to churn content out just about every day. From a writing standpoint, for me and the way I'm wired and my brain works was just a little harder to do and kind of wore me down over time. But there was some other stuff kind of going on outside of sports as well that just made it hard to fit that in. And really what brought it all back is a few weeks ago, I just was doing some Google searches trying to find some of my old material. There was one piece in particular I wanted to see if I could find it. And I did, and it was fun to go back 13 years later after some of the stuff I wrote for NFL Mocks, because you're far enough removed from it. It's like, I don't remember, like viscerally remember writing that, but my byline's on it. And that's pretty good. Like, not to break my arm, patting myself on the back, but I was like, that was pretty good. It was just a good reminder of like how much fun I used to have and how much I used to enjoy writing. You can express yourself differently. And I think there are opportunities throughout the season to look at things in a little bit different manner, get a little bit more technical and statistical and analytical, and lay it out in written form a little bit more so than you can on the website. So I'm excited to be able to do both. So check that out. Here we go. Can we get Dogzilla always has a joke, always has jokes. Dogzilla does. And I appreciate that about you. Can we get back veteran Edward R. Murrow at center? I don't think he'd be all that good. He was a thin man. He was not a stout individual, Edward R. Murrow. So I don't think you'd want him at center. Maybe outside receiver. I don't know. That's, he was a heavy smoker as well. So I don't know that I would really put a lot of faith in having that guy on the roster. All right, let's get into some of this, and then we'll just kind of see where the conversation takes us. And if you guys have bold predictions or you want to play off of what we're doing, certainly you can do that. And I said there was some overlap. And so right off the top, I had an idea that this was kind of going to happen. And I'll start with mine just because I think yours is a little bit more pronounced. But Jalen Milroe steals the show. And I thought about quantifying it, like putting a number on it, like how many touchdowns he might account for, something like that in the preseason. Look, obviously, I think there's going to be opportunities for him. They're going to want to give him, well, let me make my other point first. There's 3 quarterbacks on this roster that are going to be on the team. And because Sam Darnold is new, they're probably going to give him more snaps than we're accustomed to seeing the starter take. Like, we didn't see much of Geno Smith at all last offseason, even with a new offensive coordinator. So maybe I'm wrong. But you would think that Sam is going to get a little bit more run than we saw Geno get last offseason. And then obviously Drew Lock's going to get his opportunities. He's the guy that has to be ready. Maybe he'll even finish the preseason with the most passing attempts of any of the quarterbacks. That wouldn't surprise me. But it's been a while since they've had a third quarterback worth giving snaps to. Do you remember who the third quarterback was in preseason last year? I forgot until I looked up some numbers. Do you remember who it was? After Geno and Sam Howell? He actually had 28 pass attempts in the preseason.
I'm trying to think. I can't actually remember who the third quarterback was last year.
Let's see if anyone in the comments without, don't cheat. Don't Google it. Anybody in the comments remember who the third quarterback was in the preseason last year? No? We'll go 10, 9. Maybe not. It was PJ Walker.
Oh, wait. I was going to say it's PJ Walker because he's up in the CFL playing for Calgary now.
Right. And he got 28 attempts, and there was no chance that he was going to make the roster. So I think there's a good chance that Jalen Milroe gets, 40 to 50 pass attempts, but it's not necessarily the pass attempts I think they're going to be that are going to make the biggest impact, right? We're excited to see him run the football, and I think they're going to experiment enough without giving too much away that, man, if there's goal line packages, like I think he's going to run the football. I think there's opportunities for some spectacular plays. I made the analogy last night, and you and I have talked about this before, as far as how we see a lot of similarities and a lot of parallels between Sam Darnold and Matt Hasselbeck. Sort of not just their skill set, but just kind of their ceiling and the type of quarterbacks I think they can be long term. That, middle of the NFL, 10 to 20th ish type quarterback statistically, but a guy you can really win with and win big with if you have to. But, occasionally he's going to do things that make you shake your head, and he'll never be mistaken for one of the top 5 in the league, but a very, very good quarterback you can win with. Well, at the same time, there may be another parallel, because Seneca Wallace was there for much of Matt Hasselbeck's tenure in Seattle. And he would always do things in the preseason that would make you shake your head in astonishment, which caused a lot of fans. I've talked about this on the show before. My dad and I used to butt heads about all this all the time. Like, Seneca Wallace should be the starter. And then we saw later in his career when he got an opportunity to play full-time in Cleveland, and even here in Seattle when Hasselbeck was hurt in, I want to say it was 2008. I actually remember driving down to Candlestick Park to see them play the 49ers with Seneca Wallace playing full-time. That you get exposed, and it was pretty obvious he wasn't ever going to be a full-time starter. Not that that's the same as what we're expecting now. It's just that he did things in the preseason that made you go, wow, with his feet as well as with his arm. And I think the opportunities are going to be there for Jalen to do that. I think I could see a scenario where in those 3 games he scores or accounts for 6, 7, 8 touchdowns and gets people excited. You worded it a little bit differently. And I'm curious to hear your justification for this. You said, and maybe I shouldn't be surprised, Jalen Milroe ignites a QB firestorm. Are you saying that if my thing comes true, that people out there are going to think this is 2012 all over again and that he should be starting?
I think you're going to see. So it was interesting. We had Greg Bell on our show recently, and I kind of asked Greg, I was like, hey, like what did you see out of Jalen Milroe? Did you see enough progression? Do you think he's a viable option, or, what is Jalen Milroe? And he said, at rookie minicamp, he looked like Sam Howell. He's like, he was missing like left, right, center. Like it looked like Sam Howell again when it came to passing. He goes, by the time he stepped on the field for full team minicamp, he goes, some of the throws he was making were throws that were similar to what you saw Geno Smith make last year. And he goes, so if he has that steep of a, ascension, if he goes off right now, and, I'm sure that kid's going to work. I've already seen videos of him working with his QB coach, Jordan Palmer, QB Summit. If he's already making that small of a jump in that little of a time, and now he's going to get to go and he's going to get to work through training camp, I don't know if he's going to create enough of a firestorm to have people think this is 2012 again. But I think there's going to be enough of a firestorm to question whether or not he's the number 2 and Drew Lock's the number 3 by the end of the preseason. The reason I say that is the kid, if he, with his athletic ability and what he's able to do, even with not throwing the ball, it could make things very, very interesting. And fans always like the flashy new toy. Yeah, and, you listen to some of the comments coming out about Sam Darnold out of camp. Greg said it on our show that he struggled. He looked like he was swimming in the offensive playbook. And, we had Brian Nimhauser on Hawk Blogger, and he wasn't overly impressed with what he saw from Sam Darnold. And if Sam comes out and struggles, and I know Mike McDonald's made the statement, hey, Sam's our guy, and that may be very well true, and I believe it to be true. For this first season, Sam Darnold is the unquestioned starting quarterback of the Seattle Seahawks, but that still won't stop fans. If Jalen Milroe improves enough that he starts to become a viable option, this could make things, as I put, a firestorm, because now you're going to get the fan base riled up, which is in some respects what you want. You want the fan base to care. You want them to, have something that they're passionate about. It's just whether or not they understand that this kid still will need that time to develop, rather than pushing him out there, because we've seen a couple good games in preseason where teams play things very vanilla. So That's why I said this is kind of my bold prediction. He's going to go light it up. Everyone's going to get crazy about it. And all of a sudden, we're going to see a bunch of Jalen Milroe jerseys in the stands.
Just to be clear, though, you're saying that it's going to create a buzz among the fans, but those fans are wrong, right? Like, you're not saying.
Correct.
Okay.
No, I am not saying that Jalen Milroe should start over Sam Darnold. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying it from a fan's perspective. We will hear it, I think, by the end of training camp and preseason. That will be one of the hot topics. If he goes out and Sam looks rough in preseason, the national media will take on. And people will start making exactly the comparison you made, Dan. Well, remember 2012, they signed Matt Flynn, and then this rookie quarterback in the third round came in and just lit up the preseason, and they went with the rookie third. Should they do it again? And Mike Macdonald is not going to operate the same way, because I don't think Mike Macdonald shares the same philosophy in some respects that Pete Carroll shared, which was at that time, they didn't have a great amount of success. They had the one playoff appearance and 2 7-9 seasons. So Pete had the ability to play the rookie quarterback and say, okay, look, worse for 7-9 again with the rookie quarterback. Mike Macdonald, on the other hand, is playing with this team is trying to get back to being a regular playoff contender and pushing for the NFC Championship, and that's what he's here to do.
And it's not like Jalen Milroe is not Russell Wilson. And what I mean by that is Russell he was a very polished passer coming out of college. About it is Viens. I mean, we talk all the time about how almost none of these guys, even the elite prospects, even the 6 that were drafted in the top 12 last year, are ready to hit the ground running as rookies, to be polished passers and make that transition. Russ was as close as it comes. Like, he was very, very accomplished, played in pro style offenses, was ready for that aspect of making the jump to the NFL. It was just the height that made him a 3rd round pick. And, we heard this, if I had $1 for every time I heard it around that time, that gosh, if he was 6'4", he'd have been the first pick in the draft, or at least a top 5, top 10 pick. Milroe, even when he's during moments at Alabama when he was lighting it up, I think everybody acknowledged he still had a lot of advancements to make as a passer. One thing that I do find that's interesting, and Misfit touches on it here, says anxious to see if it's actually fixed. The progression that you just described, that you related, that Greg Bell described, is what I saw in the offseason, right? From what I saw in practice during the week in Mobile at the Senior Bowl versus what I saw at even the combine was a major step forward. And you could tell, I think Daniel Jeremiah used the term in Indy that he had gone to the lab. You could tell he'd gone to the laboratory. He'd been doing the work. And that takes a while. Like, you're a quarterback coach. You can relate to the fact that, like, you can't do that overnight. We all remember the video of Tim Tebow changing his delivery and those practice, how quick it was. And it was like, wow, if he can do that. And then as soon as the bullets start flying again, right, he dropped way down, that big looping delivery came back, and he was never able to make that fix. But yeah, I had a conversation with Greg. He said the same thing. He and Corbin Smith both said almost the same thing. Those last 2 days of mandatory minicamp, he might have been the best guy out there. They were definitely his best throwing days he had. And that can only be a good thing, right? If at the end of the day, as a quarterback coach, all you want is for your guy, regardless of where he ends up someday, you just want him to get a little bit better every day.
Yeah, and the one thing too in Jalen Milroe's case is it's not a upper body mechanic. He doesn't have some weird quirky delivery. He's trying to change that he's thrown for 15 years of his playing career so far, from high school all the way through. We're talking about a guy that needs to use his lower body more, which is a much easier fix, and feet placement is a much easier fix than trying to fix that delivery process with your upper body. That can take years to finally master, and then you got to put it in live bullets and the muscle memory and kind of rewire that. It takes a bit. Yeah.
A couple of things in the comments to catch up on. Some people were chiming in on who they thought the third quarterback was. Jaren Hall wasn't signed till the end, like right before the season started, right? Or after the season started. It was like week 1 or week 2 after the Vikings tried to sneak him through to the practice squad. Otherwise, some of the now I can't find him. There were some other good guesses here. Anyway, and then there's some other kind of non-subject related questions that I'll star, and we'll come back to those. So keep those coming, you guys. Thanks. Oh, here's one. The guy from Cal, the Browns guy, I mean, that he's right. Hoop Craze is right. So is PJ Walker, was the Browns guy. And let me say, yeah. Okay. Dogzilla's on one today. This is fun times. Here's another one that I like. My prediction from Rodder Bob. We're all going to be way wrong about something. How's that for safe? That's a good prediction. Very bold. By the way, this came up last night. There's been a change in the update to YouTube. And so if you're wondering why your usernames are coming up instead of your actual name, which makes it a little hard for me too. I don't recognize some of you. It's nothing I can do. You have to go into your profile on YouTube, from what I understand, and change that from your end. So my apologies, even though it's not something I should apologize for. All right, let's get to the next one. And I grouped these together as well because they're a little bit similar too. You say Damian Martinez takes the third running back spot by force. So to your point, the leading rusher in the preseason last year for the Seahawks was Ken McIntosh. 17 carries, 142 yards. That's an 8.4 yards per carry and 1 touchdown. That's, again, the opportunity is there. You're probably not going to see much of Ken Walker, even if he's fully healthy. They want to make sure he starts healthy. Might not even see a lot of Zach Charbonnet, although I hope that's wrong, and that might be a little bit of a spoiler alert for what my next prediction is. But you think Damian Martinez is going to take that third spot. Then the big question is, do they only keep 3? Are we talking about Ken McIntosh not making the roster?
So I think they're going to keep 4. I actually think in total in that backfield, there will be 5 players that will be in that backfield, and they'll keep out of that group. But I think they're going to keep all 4 running backs, just because if they look at their history, they've never gone through a season without losing one of their running backs or 2 of them at some point. And you don't want to be doing what we've done in the past where you're making a call. Like, I love beast mode, but you don't want to be calling beast mode again to come back out of retirement because you don't have the running backs on the, free agent market that you're liking. Yeah. No, I think Damian Martinez is really going to thrive in this system. It's very much built to what his strengths are. And I think the biggest thing with him is he has a little bit more pop to his run style than any of these backs on this, roster. And what I mean by that isn't like speed and that. I mean like the level of violence he runs with. Like, if you get in his way, he is going to go through you, very much like Chris Carson used to, Thomas Rawls before his injury even, and obviously like Marshawn. And that's something that I think we've been missing. Zach Charbonnet, yes, he is a powerful runner, but you don't see Zach Charbonnet to the same extent have that same impact when he runs into somebody. You watch Damian Martinez's college tape, he is running through people and they just leaving a pile of bodies behind him. And so I think when you look at what Mike McDonald wants to build and what they've already kind of said about this offense, we are going to run the ball. We don't care who knows it. It's a non-negotiable. We are running the football at an elite level. You need running backs like this to fill in there. And I think this is what gives him the edge in this room. And to be the third running back is, I don't look at him as a third down back. I look at him in being in quite much of the rotation of how are we getting him involved? Maybe he's in the heavy sets. When they bring in a special package with Jalen Milroe, it could be Damian Martinez, Robbie Ouzts, and Jalen Milroe in the backfield. And we are going to smash it down your throat, and you're not going to do a thing to stop us. So yeah. I do think Kenny McIntosh will be on this roster. I think Kenny McIntosh does have a role on this roster and in this room. And I think the 4 will be McIntosh, Charbonnet, Martinez, and Walker, and Robbie Ouzts as a fullback. I think they're going to keep that many in regards to the backfield.
It's going to be tough. I mean, I've crunched it. I've done a 53-man. I think you probably have too. It's really because you have to account for 2 things that are different this year than any other year. And then you have to account for a couple other allowances when it comes to the scheme and how Kubiak likes to use his personnel, right? He uses more tight ends, doesn't use as many 3 wide receiver sets. We had a discussion last night about whether they would only keep 5 wide receivers. They typically start the season with 6. You have to find a roster spot somewhere for Robbie Ouzts, and you have to find a roster spot somewhere for Jalen Milroe, because you're going to keep a fullback and you're going to keep a quarterback. Now, I've speculated maybe the Robbie Ouzts thing could come out of the tight end position. Sometimes they keep 4. You could just keep 3, and he could play in some packages when you need an extra run blocking tight end. The running back thing's tough. They've only ever, for quite some time, typically have kept 3, even without a fullback. And so to justify keeping a fourth with a fullback and a third quarterback gets really, really tough for me. I said when I did my 53-man roster projection last month, I actually had McIntosh not making the roster. And my reasoning at the time was, that's the guy that clocked a 4.6 at the combine. Like, running backs are not a dime a dozen, but they're plentiful. You look at the free agent list right now, there's a lot of big name running backs that are still available to be signed. Like, I thought he had a better chance to get through to the practice squad than Damian Martinez did. That Martinez would be a guy that other teams would go, we missed that. We really had him high on our board. We just didn't get a shot to take him late in the draft or whatever. We had hoped to sign him. I'm not so sure if that's true or not, just because I think what McIntosh put on tape last year in the 25, 30 carries he got at the end of the year, plus what he did in the preseason, might be enough to entice some team, especially if there's some injuries or not. So it's going to be fascinating. I do think that those two backs are going to get the most carries in the preseason, which makes my next prediction a little dicier. But again, I was trying to be bold, right? I've got Zach Charbonnet leading the team in preseason rushing. Now, I may have just contradicted myself a little bit, right? But I think they are going to try to protect Ken Walker, and he's not going to get a lot of carries in the preseason. But I think they want to turn the heat up a little bit, and get as many carries as they can for guys that are going to play a big role on this offense. And I think that Charbonnet last year only had 4 carries. He was banged up. They were really trying to baby him. He seems to have no injury issues throughout these OTAs. He's been healthy the whole way. I kind of feel like he's the forgotten guy. Like, everyone's talking about Walker in a contract year. They're talking about the young guys. They're talking about Martinez. I think he's got a chance to get 20, 25 carries in the preseason. And if he does, I think because he's such a good fit, he ran this similar run scheme at UCLA with Chip Kelly with the outside zone. I think the transition for him might be comfortable enough that he just hits the ground running, and I could see him having like a 250 yard preseason. Am I crazy?
No, I think there's a very good chance that Charbonnet leads his team in preseason, because I don't think you're going to see Ken Walker much. I wouldn't expect to see Ken Walker outside of maybe game 2 for, how they usually now, because they don't have 4 games. Game 2 is usually the game you see most of the veterans play a little bit. I think you'll see Ken Walker for maybe a series or 2, and that'll be it for him. I don't think they're gonna jeopardize him, because he came into minicamp banged up. Like, he barely participated in minicamp because he's injured, and he's had a whole offseason to get healthy. So that doesn't exactly bode well. And that's something I think that is really going to be interesting for Seattle, is how does the K9 thing play out? Because if you go through the preseason and say Kenny McIntosh plays really well, and Charbonnet and Martinez, and, like you're talking about the number thing, K9's in a year of his deal. And if he can't stay healthy, or you're worried about his health, and if you're going to lose him at some point, there may be an option where all of a sudden, for say, Trey Hendrickson does become available and the Bengals actually allow him to talk for trades. Maybe that's one of the pieces in that trade to go and get a Trey Hendrickson is a K9, and you ship him to, out to Cincinnati, because he's valuable enough to bring back something in less of a draft pick. So that's something where I look at it. But overall, like, I think there's a good chance Charbonnet will be very impactful in preseason. And I think this scheme can fit Charbonnet's skill set. Will be an adjustment for him because he likes to go downhill. So it'll be interesting to see how he handles the backside cutbacks, but he has run something similar at UCLA with Chip Kelly.
Do you think K9's a Seahawk in 2026?
No,
I don't either. And even because I think either way it goes, if he has another typical Ken Walker year, he runs for 900 to 1,000 yards, he catches 40 balls, he's banged up a couple of times, whatever. I think the depth of the running back room just makes it imperative that they move forward. If he has a massive year, then you're going to have to pay him $8 to $10 million average annual value. When you, again, have a young and deep and talented running back room, I don't know that makes a lot of sense either. It's one of those things where I think there's a scenario where things could play out a certain way where he might be in play at the trade deadline because of all that depth, if they're able to keep all those guys, right? And when I say those guys, I even include George Halani. Like, hopefully they can keep him on the practice squad, because I think he has some NFL starter qualities as well. So it's really hard for me to imagine it making sense when given other potential needs on the roster and just the quality of the running back group.
Agreed. And the thing for me, like, I look at guys that have gotten, extended contracts with Seattle. We're talking Chris Carson. We're talking Marshawn Lynch. They had a little bit of extra with them when they came. Like, Chris Carson set a certain tone when he ran the ball. Beast mode was the life force of that team. So it was different when you're dealing with that situation. Ken Walker, I get that, he's been injured and the O-line has been a mess. But when you're talking about what you're talking about value-wise and paying, you still have to consider they're still trying to figure out how they're going to work Charles Crossen. You're still trying to figure out if you're going to pay Reek Woolen or not next year, depending on the season he has. You're trying to figure out if you're paying Abe Lucas. Like, there's a whole list of guys. You're going like, does K9 jump atop any of those guys in your order of priority as a running back that hasn't been able to stay consistently healthy season in and season out? Yeah. Makes it hard to justify.
I could be crazy. I could be completely wrong and look like a fool for saying that, because I have said on record multiple times that I think he's capable of
100%
a Jahmyr Gibbs type impact on this team. Statistically, I could see a 1,500 yards rushing, 70 catch season, like an Alvin Kamara, Jahmyr Gibbs type season. If that happens, then Mike McDonald's probably going to go to John Schneider's office and say, we got to find a way to keep this guy. So I get that.
Agreed.
I also think the odds of that happening are pretty low. I love his talent. I hope, this isn't coming across as me crapping on a guy, but I think between the injury issues and how broken he seemed to be last year, like, he's going to have to pick this offense up quick and get comfortable with it quick in order to have a season like that. He's going to have to come out of the gates like flying, and that hasn't always been his strength. It's taken him a while to kind of get going. Here's one I wanted to throw up here, by the way, that I don't believe this is true, because Dogzilla likes to joke. He says, just so you know, I am screencasting this onto a big screen inside the Tits Up in Tulalip. I'm going to need pictures.
Exactly. Same.
Pictures, or it didn't happen, right? You can't send pictures here, but you can hit me on Twitter or whatever. I'm going to need proof. That's a bold claim. It's not a prediction, but that's a bold claim. If it is true, you're the man. And that would be awesome. I should pay people to do that.
Yes.
Sports bars, like, hey, right after the Seahawks game, just screencast the post-game show. Ryan Eddy, new YouTube member. Good to have you. Appreciate it. Some other things I'm going to get to in just a little bit for those of you who have hit up some of the starred comments. Okay. Let's finish up our bold predictions. We each have one more. You went with, there's always a big star in the preseason on defense, right? We'll never forget Nick Reed in the preseason. He had the undersized edge player from Oregon. It just had tons of sacks. And then who was the dude two years ago? Levi. Remember again, that's something about
Levi
Bell. Undersized edge players that tend to blow up in the preseason. Jamie Sheriff last year was another example. And it doesn't matter to fans. Doesn't matter if it's in the fourth quarter against fourth stringers. Does not matter. I even jotted this down for when we were talking about the quarterbacks and didn't get to it. But, like, do you remember Mike Teal? Seahawks drafted him in the 7th round out of Rutgers. He looked like, back then, this is 2009, the prototypical NFL quarterback, 6'4", tall, big arm. He had a game. He got to start against the Raiders, and it was fun to go back and look this up because in my memory, I thought it was a second half where he kind of went off. But it was in the last preseason game of the preseason, so it wasn't against starters. It was back when they played 4 games, and in the 4th game, nobody played. And he went 11 out of 19 for 148 yards and 2 touchdowns. He looked phenomenal. Had touchdowns to Ben Obamanu and Deion Butler. Talk about a blast from the past. That was another one where after that game, my dad swore up and down that he should be the starting quarterback over Matt Hasselbeck. He just never liked Hasselbeck. I couldn't convince him otherwise. But there are guys like that on defense every year that rise up and have great performances and get you excited. The difference here is with Ivy, we're not talking about an undersized guy. We're not talking about a guy who has physical limitations. We're talking about a guy who kind of looks like the prototype for like a big 5 tech or a big physical. I mean, I see some Frank Clark in him a little bit. Not the twitchiest edge rusher, but a guy who's high motor, really strong, long limbs. What is it about Ivy that makes you think he's going to go off this preseason?
I just think kind of, what you touched on, playing against the third and fourth stringers and stuff. But when I look at this pass rushing group and I look at the fact there's not a lot of depth behind it, we're talking, Derek Hall, Boy Mafe, DeMarcus Lawrence, and then your other two, and Chenna's involved in that. But I feel like Chenna this year, I don't know how much we're going to expect pass rushing. I think there's going to be more of a need for him to be the run blocker that he is. Or sorry, not run blocker, but run setting edge defender. The thing for me, though, is when I look at Jared Ivey, is he has shown in the SEC that he can produce as a pass rusher, which is not going against weak talent in the tackle department for at any length. And I think if you get him in as a rotational guy, I think there's a good chance he goes off and becomes a legitimate pass rush rotational piece this year for the Seahawks, where you're playing him in certain situations when you need to give a Boy Mafe a breather or Derek Hall, because the other two guys we're going to talk about in this pass rush, that really contribute to it are going to be Byron Murphy probably and Leo Williams. Both of those guys are interior players. They're not coming off the edge. And I think they're going to need that, kind of presence to be someone that's either, whether it's Jared Ivey or it's Connor O'Toole, are going to be guys that they're going to need one of them to make this roster and be, somewhat of a rotational pass rush piece.
It's funny. I think you and I have even talked about this, how it feels like it's going to come down to he or Mike Morris for like that last kind of defensive line roster spot in defense when you combine the interior guys with the linebackers. And it's kind of funny when you look at the Seahawks official roster, they have Riley Mills, Mike Morris, and Leonard Williams listed as defensive ends, where they have Ivy listed in the linebacker group. So maybe he's not competing against Mike Morris. I mean, at the end of the day, he is, because they could decide to go with, well, we'll keep one more linebacker instead of one defensive end, whatever. You can call him whatever you want to call him. But I do find that fascinating. He's an interesting case for me, just because he was like, when I went to Mobile, I obviously was aware of that group from Ole Miss. Like, it was, their whole defensive line was there, right? It was Walter Nolan, it was Prince Umanmielen, it was Jared Ivey, and even JJ Pegues. Like, there's a reason Ole Miss was number 2 in the country in total defense last year, right? But I didn't, and I was intrigued by the length and the size and everything else. I just didn't see anything from him. Like, he just didn't look great in one-on-ones. He didn't dominate anybody. He didn't really flash for me. And so I was naturally down on him. But when we signed him, I went back and dug into the tape a little bit harder, and you can see some of the skill set. And I think it was an inspired UDFA signing. Like, I think that's one we're going to look back on and go, okay, I was hoping to get an edge player in this draft, and I don't really consider Riley Mills an edge player, although he'll move around a little bit. Yeah, I'm really excited to see what he can do in this preseason. And to your point, I think he's going to get a ton of opportunities to do so. And then my final one is also on the defensive side of the ball. And it's funny how we did not compare notes ahead of time, but it's funny how some of them are similar. I predicted a player to lead the team in tackles for the preseason. And this isn't always a player that ends up being a starter, right? I think Patrick O'Connell might have led the team in tackles last year. Who do you think I chose?
Ooh, I think you chose, the way you're leading this on, Dan, I'm going to go with Drake Thomas.
There you go. Nice. I like it. Wait, hold on. Timeout. I got to use these more often. It's good stuff. Yeah. Don't sleep on Drake Thomas. I think he might be the most overlooked player on the roster. He was a guy that, when we poached him off from the Raiders, and it was in the cut down to 53 2 years ago, it was one of the classic case of like, most players don't get claimed these days. Teams can have confidence that a guy's going to get to the practice squad. That's why when we watch these Hard Knock shows, they're like, hey, we're going to put you on the practice squad. Well, it's not that easy, but it kind of, like, teams don't make a lot of claims, not as many as they used to. But Thomas was a guy that the Raiders fully expected, really wanted, thought about keeping on the regular roster, tried to sneak him to the practice squad. Seahawks sniped him. And he was a guy that I studied quite a bit coming out that year out of NC State, really liked the tape. He didn't test great. He's not the most dynamic athlete in the world, but super, super productive. And you could see that on tape. Can play both positions. In his career at NC State, 293 tackles, 47 tackles for loss, 19 sacks from a guy that played mostly Mike linebacker in college, and 4 interceptions. Like he's capable of kind of doing it all. His last season, he had 101 tackles and 7.5 sacks. And I was really surprised that he actually made the roster last year. He was coming off the severe injury. It was one of those injuries they never talked about. We didn't know what it was. It might have been a patella tendon. It took longer than ACLs typically do. But then I think most of us were surprised when he made the 53 last year because he just didn't do much in the preseason or whatever. And then you start to hear as the season goes along, like how much the staff likes that guy, how much Mike McDonald likes that guy. And a lot of it has to do with what's above the shoulders, like how smart he is, how he sees the game. He's got the size. He's 6 foot, 235, 240 pounds, right? In an era where a lot of inside linebackers are smaller. I just think he's a guy that people keep counting out. And I think, again, especially coming off the knee cleanup, I think Ernest Jones is going to get very little exposure during the preseason. I think it's going to be a lot of Tyrese Knight probably playing, although it actually wouldn't surprise me. I bet we'll see Drake Thomas playing the Mike linebacker, wearing the green dot a lot in the preseason, Tyrese Knight playing his regular position at weak side linebacker, which is going to give him a chance to make a lot of tackles. And I think he's going to show people what his value is to the roster.
So it's funny, Dan, because I remember last year we were both at the Cleveland Browns preseason game, sitting in different sections. And I remember texting you going, Drake Thomas is on the field. And we hadn't seen him up to that point at all. And I remember saying he's wearing the green dot. And we both looked and we went, holy cow, he is wearing the green dot. Like that to me signifies how important he is for a guy that didn't make it through any of the training camp. Really. He was still on the, inactive, finally gets cleared for that last preseason game. And the first thing they do is give him the green dot on the second defensive unit ahead of a Patrick O'Connell and some of those guys. I think he's a great depth piece. My thing with Drake Thomas, and I think 100% he's going to lead the team in tackles. I think they need another one. They need another Drake Thomas for that linebacker room. And that's one thing for me that's still a worrisome piece here is if Ernest Jones or Tyrese Knight goes down, like Drake Thomas can't fill both those roles. He can fill one, and you need somebody else in case for whatever reason you need to, give a breather to so-and-so. You need to get another guy with that skill set because he is such a smart football player. That's one thing I will give Drake Thomas. He's like the Matt Hasselbeck of linebackers.
I like that. I will say this. I question, and I talked about this last night on the show, like I question whether they would keep 4 inside linebackers though, because of some of these other needs they're going to have to pull from on the roster. And because they have guys that in certain packages can kind of play that role. Like Greg told me, and I don't know if you guys talked about this on your episode, that he was kind of surprised that they had Nick Emenwari playing a lot of weak side linebacker in OTAs and mini team. And so maybe their thought is like, well, we can use, like, how often are we really going to need a 4th inside linebacker? Because in nickel and dime packages, we might even pull Tyrese Knight off the field. Like you might only have 1 inside linebacker. You're going to bring another safety or another corner in. I think there are other ways you can kind of get around that spot. But I also will say that I feel nearly the same way this year that I did about Drake Thomas 2 years ago about Derek Jackson out of Kentucky. And the fact that they didn't get him right away when undrafted free agency starts, I thought was interesting. In fact, they signed the other kid first, the kid out of Utah, right?
Woodard, Jackson Woodard.
Jackson Woodard out of UNLV, and everybody thought he got the big bonus, and everybody thought he was such a productive player. He was kind of a shoe-in to make the team as a UDFA. He gets cut the first week, and then they bring Jackson in. I think Jackson's a better player, really productive college career. He can play Mike and Will. He was surprisingly good in coverage despite his size, because I thought, he must be a thumper because he's 245 pounds. So I think they might have that guy, honestly.
They might. And, Jackson's definitely someone that I'm very interested in seeing what he does. Greg did mention that on our show, that he saw in their like nickel and sub packages, a lot of the time it was, and he predicts that, it'll be Ernest Jones on there and Nick Emenwari at the weak side linebacker spot. I feel like they're going to try and do what the Cardinals failed at and what the Giants failed at to do with, Simmons? I forget his name.
You're talking about
Simmons. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And do that initially with Nick Emenwari. And I think a big telling sign about Nick Emenwari's ability at safety will be whether or not Kobe Bryant gets an extension. If they believe that Nick Emenwari can move back to safety, I think what you'll see is they may not sign Kobe Bryant. They may let him play out this deal and be like, hey, we've got the guy that's going to be the next safety with Julian Love already on the roster. That would break my heart because I think Kobe Bryant is posed for a very big season coming up.
Yeah, we've talked about Kobe for months. You and I have, and then I mentioned earlier this week on the show that I'm really excited to see what Jarek Reed can do in this preseason with a full offseason where he was healthy as well, and that could play into this. Like if Jarek Reed goes out and balls out this preseason, that might play into their decision of whether or not to extend Kobe. So yeah, that'll be interesting to see. I'm fascinated by how they're going to work that inside linebacker group. I really am. And how Emenwari is going to fit into all that. Let's kind of catch up on some of these questions here. We got some fun ones, including one. Okay. So right off the Hoop Craze asked what position I played. And so while we were talking earlier, let me see if I can find this. I went back and pulled this up. So I played a bunch of different positions. But I decided by the time I was a ninth grader, I decided I wanted to be a quarterback. So that's what I committed to. And as a ninth grader, so we had in Washington anyway, we have junior highs, not middle school. So we go 7 through 9, right? And so we just moved back to the area. We kind of jumped around a little bit, and I played quarterback. But during that season, I was like third string, right? I just wasn't very good. I was a good scrambler. I was a good runner. Just didn't have a strong arm at all. Like couldn't throw deep at all to save my life. And so my ninth grade coach kind of started moving me around a little bit, played a little bit of running back, played some other stuff. And then I went to high school with the intention of being a running back. I thought that was my best position. And then we're standing around as sophomores, and we had a stud quarterback on the sophomore team. He was expected to challenge for varsity snaps. We all thought he was going to play college football. He was like 6'5" and big, strong arm, everything. He was a good friend of mine, but we didn't have anyone else. And so the first practice of the year, we're all standing around. The coach goes, hey, we need a backup quarterback. Who wants to play quarterback? And I sat there and I was like, no, don't do it. Don't raise your hand. Don't. I want to play running back. And nobody stood up. And so finally I did. And I volunteered to play quarterback. So I feel like I wasted a year. Ultimately I ended up settling in at running back later in my career and before I stopped playing, but I found this, and this is, you guys will get a kick out of this. Let me take this. So there you go. I posted this a couple of years ago, and then it came up in one of my memories. Like, how did I end up not being a rich NFL quarterback? Like, we wore the same number. We're the same height. We had the same hair. Like, how did that happen? I mean, the answer is pretty simple. It's my hands are tiny and his are giant. That's the difference. How, as a quarterback coach, how important is hand size?
It is important. You don't have to have ginormous hands, but you have to have basically the way I always look at it is when I'm looking at quarterbacks and they're throwing the ball, can they get their ring finger onto the second lace area comfortably and have their index finger still reach towards the point of the ball? If you're now going to like your pinky or your ring finger is now bumping up to that last set, now I'm getting a little concerned, because the problem with that is when the weather gets bad and you really have to control that football, are you going to be able to do it in those certain situations? And that's where it kind of becomes a problem. So there's actually, funny enough, there's a guy on Instagram, Dan, that does he studies finger grip placements of quarterbacks, and there's a whole thing about the terminology and the numbers they use, and like it's rather interesting. But to see the different grips that are actually out there for quarterbacks, it's quite interesting.
Yeah, I'd have to hold a football now. I can't honestly. tell you exactly where my finger placement is, but I know this. It's one of those things that 40 years after the fact, if you handed me a football right now, I'd go right to it. Like the muscle memory is just right there. It's a lot of fun. That was a fun question. I appreciate that. Here's another question from X-Wing. Feels like we're banking on O-line players getting better, both from experience and a better coaching staff. What's a realistic time frame to judge this year's line? I think there's kind of two phases to it. Obviously, end of the season, right? Like, let's get to the end of the year and let's reevaluate and where are we now? Like, are we on the way? Are we a competent, productive, useful offensive line now with an opportunity for more because it's built around so many young players? Obviously, there will be a decision to make about Abe Lucas at the end of the year. But do we have the pieces in place? But there's also like how it's going to impact us this year. And I kind of think like the bye week is probably a good marker for that, right? Like I expect some bumps along the way early in the season. But I would think that's a decent signpost for us to point to. Like, how do we feel when it comes to week 8 about how this offensive line is performing? What do you think?
I think that's actually a really good mark. For me, when we're talking about the offensive line, it's kind of a twofold question here for me, because are we talking as a whole or are we talking about a certain side? Are we going to see the running game be more of a factor, which will then directly affect our pass protection? And that's something that some people miss in the judging of an O-line is, okay, if your run game isn't working and isn't viable, then your pass protection is going to be a lot more difficult to execute. And so when I look at Seattle, I want to see, like, are we establishing the run? By week 4, we should know what this running game is going to look like and how effective it will probably be. And if it's a more effective running game and more useful, I think week 8 is a good marker to have. That bye week is a good marker to have to go like, hey, like, where are we as an offensive line? Like, what's the sack rate of Sam Darnold or the pressure rate? And how is that correlated to our run game? And the other number to check in on that is how often are we calling play action plays? If we're calling play action plays at a more successful and higher rate, you'll be able to say, hey, the offensive line is working because we're able to establish a run game, because play action is practically useless, as we saw last year, if you don't run the football.
I'm glad you said that, because there's been so much focus this offseason on the new scheme and how it relates to running the football, the wide zone, right? But we got to protect the quarterback too. And that's been an issue from the interior in the last couple of seasons. And so I think when you look at the two main battles, and you look at Oluwatimi versus Sundell, and you look at Bradford versus Haynes at right guard, like, we talk so much about scheme fit, that Sundell might start at center because he can get to the second level. He can run. He's so much more athletic than Oluwatimi. And yet Oluwatimi, his last 2 years in college, one at Virginia, one at Michigan, gave up 0 sacks and 1 pressure. Like, was a superior pass protector, and that's why he won the Remington and the Outland. And then you have Bradford versus Haynes, where, well, Haynes is the guy that can get to the second level again, played wide zone in college. That fits him better. That's why we're going to see, we're going to get the most out of him. He's probably going to win that job. Well, let's pump the brakes, because John Schneider and Mike McDonald keep talking about Anthony Bradford and how, even though he's 345 pounds or 340 pounds, he's an elite athlete and he can get to the second level. To me, it might come down to deciding those two battles, who can pass protect the best. It's not just about wide zone.
It's just not about wide zone. And that's going to be the interesting thing on who pass protects the best, who is able, and also who makes the least amount of mistakes in a game. And that's one thing too, that the mental errors is going to be a big component of this scheme, because if you make a mental error in wide zone, like you don't take the right step or you're false stepping, it throws the whole line out of whack. Because the whole point of this is you're all moving as one singular organism to an area of the field. And if you don't do that properly, and one guy's lacking or he's laid off the ball or whatever it is, it throws the whole thing and just it gets completely shot on its process. So you have to be mentally on your cues too. It's not so much about who gets the second level better, who gets, who's more physical. It's who's actually going to do their assignment properly. And that's why you see in this, the wide zone scheme that Mike Shanahan and Gary Kubiak ran for so many years, you look at some of the linemen they had, they weren't always the most physically gifted guys. They weren't also the highest draft picks. Some of them were, turned into superstars. They were undrafted guys because they understood their job the best and how to get into the right spot and be in the right spot consistently. And, that's the one thing. It's really interesting. I tell people, everyone wants to go back to just Denver with Mike Shanahan and Gary Kubiak's system and talk about what it looked like from there. Go back and watch the 1994 San Francisco 49ers, because guess who their offensive coordinator was? Mike Shanahan, and the run game and QB coach was Gary Kubiak. Go watch that offense with Steve Young and Ricky Waters and the things that they did. That was really the start of the wide zone scheme, coming out of what Mike Holmgren had taught Mike Shanahan when he was in San Francisco, because Mike Holmgren had left a few years prior to that and left Mike Shanahan in charge. So it's very, very interesting to see how that, offense grew from Mike Holmgren's initial thing and Bill Walsh's.
I think going back and looking at the Houston Texans from 06 to 13 is a lot of fun too, with Gary Kubiak.
Yep.
Not just Gary Kubiak, but John Benton as his offensive line coach there. And I think Rick Dennison was part of that staff at some point too. Really fun, especially when you look at like some of the offensive linemen they had. Not a lot of all pros. They didn't have Hall of Famers or anything up front for the most part there. And yet they were so effective up front. Ryan Eddy says his hot take is our tight end room will have more TDs than wide receivers. I assume you're talking about the regular season. That would be pretty crazy. But as much as Kubiak likes to run 2 and 3 tight end sets, it's a possibility, I suppose. Question from Peter. Thanks for the super chat. Which free agent should the Hawks pick up before the season starts? I'm enjoying the crossover show, watching from New Hampshire. Go Hawks. Anyone left on the market? And I'll gladly pull up Over the Cap and kind of look at some available free agents. But anyone that strikes you that might make some sense to sign?
Ooh, nobody really stands out to me that I feel like, we need to go get that guy. Like, I've seen things where people have said, like, go get Brandon Sheriff because he's an all-pro guard. And I'm just like, no, like, I don't. He was an all-pro guard, but that's the thing. There's nothing about the free agent market right now that screams to me like there's someone we need to add from that group right now.
Yeah, the only thing that again, I'd still, I know you hear things from time to time that they like Brandon Peely or they like Bohannon. Like, we need that nose tackle, right? If there was a guy that could offer anything that was still left on the free agent market, but those guys are all signed. Like, there's nobody left really that just makes any sense from a free agency standpoint. And I'm just taking a look at it now. Yeah, there's just nobody that's not either too old or just has never ever shown anything that would make you think that they might be better than Brandon Peely or Quentin Bohanna. So that's the one thing I think that'll happen at the cut to 53. I think unless one of those guys really stands up and establish themselves, the fact that there's just that one cut now down to 53, it's essentially another wave of free agency right before the season starts. And I do think that'll be one area that, again, accounting for the fact that maybe one of those guys really steps up and takes that spot, there might be an opportunity there if a guy is a camp cut. Either a young guy that team's trying to sneak through, right? Like a nose tackle version of the Drake Thomas move, or just an older guy that they don't want to guarantee his money, and so they let him go before the first week. So otherwise, I think the roster's set, honestly.
I do as well, and I think it'll take some injuries or something for them to have to go out and get somebody, and I think they're more likely to do it via trade than they are to do it via free agency. But you know what's really interesting, Dan? I was just looking, because the whole conversation there about the O-line kind of got me stirring, is last year we never had a run game coordinator in Seattle. It was the weirdest thing. We were all like, who's the run game coordinator for Seattle?
Right.
Do you know who the run game coordinator is this year? They actually have one.
Is it Justin Outen?
No, or is it Rick Dennison.
Yeah. He's got
which
like
is interesting.
5 titles.
Yeah, he's the senior offensive advisor and the run game coordinator. But when he initially got hired, he was only hired as a senior advisor to the offense. So What I find really interesting about that is clearly he's now stepped into a more significant role by taking on that, as Jake Peetz is still the pass game coordinator. Houghton is considered the run game specialist.
Okay. Kendrick Lamar, thanks for watching, says Clowney, like the fact he's still out there, I think until he signs elsewhere, there's always the possibility he could sign here because of the year that Mike McDonald got out of him in Baltimore 2 years ago. I just think that the DeMarcus Lawrence signing would make that signing redundant. They have very similar skill sets in that they are really physical, good edge setting, edge players who can get after the quarterback, but their best, most dynamic pass rush days are behind them. I just think they're too similar in play style, in age, in everything else that I don't know it makes a lot of sense unless there's an injury.
Yeah. The thing for me, if they're going to bring in Clowney, that means to me, Connor O'Toole or Jared Ivey was completely a failure for them to go out and get a kind of a clone of DeMarcus Lawrence in some respects. And then I think if Mike McDonald really wanted Clowney, he'd be pounding the table for him right now to bring him into camp.
Yeah, I think it would have happened already. We are getting some Amari Cooper love in the comments. I think I am kind of surprised he hasn't signed. Like, he's just been a really productive guy when he's healthy, wherever he goes. I just think that, we've got our veterans and we have our young guys, and they don't want to take snaps away from those. Like, you're not going to stunt the development or take snaps away from a guy like Torrey Horton, for Amari Cooper, when he's not the player he used to be, right? He's not the dynamic downfield threat that he used to be, more of a possession guy. That's kind of that's what Cooper Kupp was brought in to be. I just don't think he's a roster fit. And I think it's going to be hard enough to decide who the fifth and sixth or who the fifth receiver is going to be. And there might not be a sixth, as we talked about some of the roster construction challenges, but I don't see any way that they're going to look outside the organization to bring someone else into that group.
I think it's going to be 5 receivers, Dan. I think it's going to be obviously JSN, Cooper Kupp, Torrey Horton, Jake Bobo, and Ricky White.
But I think that making the team.
I don't. I think Horton's going to push him out. Wow. I think if Horton's healthy, he's going to push him out because he's a younger and more capable and can do the same things.
Wow.
I think he's even a better blocker than MVS. And the other reason I'll say that is I think Elijah Arroyo is going to take quite a few snaps at the X spot in the receiving core and not as just a tight end.
That would be you should have made that as one of your bold predictions.
I know it was going to be one of them, and I decided not to. I went away from it.
I think that would be one of the more surprising moves they can make at the cut to 53. I think he was brought in kind of as a no-brainer. Like, we need a veteran guy and a guy that can still take the top off and a guy that knows this system. And that would be a tough one. Although I wouldn't be mad about it because it would mean, to your point, that Torrey Horton had a phenomenal preseason and that they want to give opportunities to some of those other guys, right? We keep hearing about Cody White just keeps making plays. He's another guy, long outside receiver. There's Jake Bobo, obviously. Steven Sims just kept making plays in OTAs, and he can return kicks. Like, there's some depth there. I'll have to give that some consideration. I don't want to dismiss that right out of hand. That's an inspired prediction there from you. Prime 7999 says LeMay is a grown-ass man, worked with Benton in regards to pass sets. He's more than just a guy backup, MFer, lives to run block. I'll never forget that Arizona game last year. And I was down there for that when they had that whole package in that game that worked so well with he and Lucas pulling around, and Charbonnet had 126 yards and 2 touchdowns or whatever, had the long one. He really struggles in pass protection. I would have to see some major steps forward. And I think the fact that he has 2 guys that are above him on the depth chart makes that really, really tough. I do like him. I think he moves really well for a guy his size. And I don't know if they've given up on the idea that in a pinch he could ever go out and help you at right tackle, but he was an all Pac-12 performer at right tackle at Utah for 2 years. He was an all Pac-12 performer at right guard also. They have cross-trained him at left guard and right guard. I like that versatility. I do think kind of long-term his role is sort of that super sub that can play either guard spot. And I suppose if things went really off the rails, you could kick him out to right tackle, and he could get you out of a game as well.
Yeah, the thing with LeMay, at least from what I heard and talking to people, was he was taking a lot of reps at left guard with the second unit behind Gray Zabel. And I'm going to throw a name into this mix that I think's got probably a hand up on and is going to make this roster in the O-line room, and that's Bryce Cabledew. Bryce Cabledew will make this lineup because I think he's just got so much upside, and you look at his scores and him moving into a guard spot, which is where they're going to put him, like he could shock us all and actually maybe even jump. If he's good enough and it fits, he could maybe be the starter at right guard by the end of the year. Who knows? Because we're not talking about a guy that's barely played. Like there's an opportunity, and he is a bigger player than, a Christian Haynes and such. And I don't want to give up on a Haynes and Bradford from, like you said, Dan, they won't stop talking about him. But I feel like Bryce Cabledew might be a sneaky guy that we look at in preseason and we go, wow, like who's that guy at that spot? I think he could be a viable option in this offensive line group for a few years to come.
Yeah, and that's why I think whoever loses the Haynes-Bradford competition probably gets traded. Like I think both those guys would have enough value that you can get a day 3 pick or whatever for them next year. This is kind of fun. I just went back. I mentioned it earlier, but 2009, 2016. Was that the timeline? Let me just make sure I have this right. 2006 to 2013. Okay, when Gary Kubiak was the head coach in Houston and John Benton was his offensive line coach, and they were running the exact same scheme. I'm sure it's evolved that we're going to see this year in Seattle. These were some of his the opening day starting lineups for his offensive line for those years. He did have an elite or almost elite left tackle throughout his entire time there. You know that name?
Oh, Dwayne Brown, I believe.
Dwayne Brown. Yeah, he was the starting left tackle the entire time that he was there. Or actually, I'm sorry, 2006 to 2000. He was from 2008 to 2013. He was a starting left tackle, and then for most of his time, he had Eric Winston at right tackle. Very solid player. Probably, I don't know, just off the top of my head, probably like Abe Lucas-ish, right?
Yep.
I don't think he was ever an all-pro. Maybe he was. Maybe I'm missing that. But just a really, really good right tackle. But here's the interesting part. So his center throughout that entire time was a guy named Chris Myers, who bounced around, was not a highly drafted guy, couldn't make rosters early in his career, finally caught on. He was a good athlete. He was a little bit tight, more of the Jalen Sundell kind of mold. He was 6'4", 310, I think 305. But just a great fit and a perfect fit in that outside zone scheme. So he was the starting center the entire time. The guards were like a revolving door of guys that at first glance, I don't think any of them ever made a Pro Bowl. So here are just some examples, some of the guards that played for him. Fred Weary, Chester Pitts, Mike Brazil, Chris White, Casey Studdard, Wade Smith, Ben Jones, Brandon Brooks. Like we're talking about journeyman, right? Replacement level type players. And for all the fretting we've been doing here about the interior offensive line and how it's not like this, he was able to be dominant at times with Arian Foster and some of the other guys he had there in Houston running the football with guys like that. So if any of you are really concerned that we got to go out and we got to find a way to, we got to convince the Bears they made a bad move this offseason. We got to get Joe Thuney or whatever. Like I'm kidding, obviously, but you can succeed with these guys. It's like the things they've been telling us for a long time that you don't have to have elite talents in there. If you have the right scheme, you coach them up right, they're in the right place, doing the right things. Like you can win with the guys that we have on the roster right now.
Yep. No, and that's where I feel like you look at John Benton and just the lineman he drafted this year. Gray Zabel, we're talking about for one, obviously, but even Mason Richmond out of Iowa, you're 4-year starter there, which is not an easy thing to do. Iowa is always known for producing linemen.
Only one other player has started 4 years at left tackle at Iowa, and that was Tristan Wirfs.
Yep.
Pretty good player.
So that's what I mean. Like I think there is a very, in my opinion, when I'm going to do my 53, I think Cable Do and Mason Richmond make this roster. I don't think they're going to want to subject either one of them to the waiver and to trying to sneak them through the practice squad, because I think in some respects Seattle got lucky. Those guys were still there in the areas they picked them in. And I think to what your point was with Damian Martinez earlier, Dan, where you go, some teams are sitting there going, oh, darn, like should have taken him earlier. Like I think that's a good case for those two. I think the 3 guys that Seattle drafted this year will make this roster.
Damn. So that means Mike Jarrell is gone, right? Like Bradford's definitely gone. And maybe like I'd have to do, how does that math work out? Like you might not be able to keep both those centers. Like, I think
you're keeping 9 offensive linemen. I would like, this is the offensive line group that I think
if you're keeping only 9, I don't know that you can keep whoever doesn't win the center job. You might have to lean on Haynes being able to sub, ZELLE being able to move over, because I think Josh Jones is on this team no matter what. So there's 6.
So
if Cable Do and Richmond, then that's 8. Go ahead.
So this is the group I had. I had Olu, I had Gray Zabel, Charles Cross, Sundell, Christian Haynes, Abe Lucas, Bryce Cable Do, Mason Richmond, and Josh Jones.
So no Lamea, no Bradford, no Jarrell.
I think you have a higher chance of getting Lamea and Jarrell through to the practice squad. And I think there's a chance you can trade Bradford for something.
Yeah, you could be right there. I think those at that cut down to 53, like offensive linemen aren't getting claimed. Bottom of the roster offensive linemen aren't really getting claimed all that often. So,
and we're talking about 2 guys in Cable Do and Richmond that I think have better college tape than Lamea or Mike Jarrell did coming out.
And they were drafted by this staff with input from heavy input from John Benton.
And John Benton and Rick Dennison are the 2 guys that are there banging the table for those 2. That's why I think you're going to see that. Because really Lamea's pick, and this is what I know from last year and just my sources, he was very much a Scott Huff pick. And I think that's where I think with that grouping, because the one thing about Cable Do and Mason Richmond that we're both talking about here is both of these dudes could swing out to tackle like you were talking about and play in a pinch.
Yeah.
They both have the ability of doing that. So does Josh Jones, because I think Josh Jones slides in as your left tackle backup for Charles Cross. Mason Richmond is your backup tackle for Abe Lucas. And then you're talking about Cable Do, Christian Haynes, and Gray Zabel. And you know what? Maybe Olu or Jalen Sundell can swing for a guard spot if needed.
I don't hate that. And I know that, man, the backlash, if those moves happened, would be pretty severe. A lot of fans would be saying, this just goes to show you that Schneider doesn't know how to draft offensive linemen, whatever. But that was, again, a different coaching staff, a different scheme. They were looking for other characteristics. I actually would consider that a win if Cable Do and Richmond end up making this roster over a couple of the guys that were drafted either in 24 or 23. Because it would mean that this coaching staff believes in them and they can fit into this scheme, and they're better athletes. Like I'll be really disappointed if Cable Do doesn't make the roster. Like I could see Richmond maybe getting through because he wasn't a great tester and all of that. But Cable Do would be a guy that I'd shed a little tear if he got away.
Cable Do for me was a guy that I fell in love with in the process. And the more I've gone back and watched him, and the more back I've gone back and watched Mason Richmond, like Iowa ran outside zone this year, and they ran it for the last couple seasons, and they couldn't throw the ball very well. Like they were not known for their throwing of the football. And their running backs were averaging almost 5 yards a carry. And Mason Richmond was a bully. Like he moved that side of the line. Cable Do does the same thing. Like you have potentially 2 very, very good players that you could be sitting here and going, yeah, you know what? Seattle's actually got depth on the offensive line. They've got guys that can play if something doesn't go right.
Yeah. Yeah. I like it. Let me just check the comments real quick, see if we got anything cool here. I think we've kind of run through them all. Yeah, that was fun. I like it. I like the fact that in 2 days we'll be able to say training camp month is here. It's pretty quick. It's pretty amazing how quickly it shifts. Like once they wrapped up minicamp, especially because they moved it up this year and then cut off the 3rd day. And so we're talking about the 10th or 11th of June. We're like, it's going to be forever until training camp. And now here we are. And Tuesday is July 1st. right? Yeah.
Yep. Tuesday is July 1st.
Again, I don't know how the calendar works. And then then I'll be taking off, headed back to Seattle on the 16th, driving across country again. Yeah, I think we got everybody taken care of over there. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. As always, I over the next 3 days am going to be doing my NFC West opponent preview. So Jake Ellenbogen is going to join me tomorrow to talk about the Rams, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, Walter Mitchell for the Cardinals and Rob Guerrera for the 49ers. And so we'll be doing that over the next few days. And then obviously any breaking news or anything like that, we'll chime in with as necessary. Bryce, how are you managing these next couple of weeks of the dog days of the content creation NFL offseason?
So we just released a video today with our interview with Greg Bell. So we have that out on HawkZone Rundown right now. So go over there and give that a watch. Some good nuggets in there from Greg. We'll have our Pulse of the Hawks segment back tomorrow night live at 6 p.m. with Mookie Alexander coming back on from our affiliate Field Goals. And then we've got, I will be hopping on Wednesday with Bill Ofsted of the Seahawks Playbook podcast and doing a show with him. Tuesday, we have Cody Alexander of Match Quarters, basically defensive kind of guy that does a lot of film, very similar to what Garrett Greenlee does that we both have had on our show. But he really dives into defense and scheme. So we're going to have him come on, talk about the Mike McDonald defense, how he thinks this defense will evolve over this season. And then a couple other guests lined up, potentially Bobby Peters, who's written a few books and does a lot of study into the West Coast offense. So he's done a deep dive on Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay stuff. So we'll get him on to talk about the Seahawks offense. What's it going to look like under Gary Kubiak? How does he think the schemes and stuff will work? And then, that's kind of it as of right now. We'll obviously have you on as well, Dan, but those are kind of the main things coming up in the HawkZone Rundowns future.
Well, I am going to throw a frozen pizza in the oven, and then I am going to check out your conversation with Greg Bell because I can't wait to watch that. So, tune into that. Subscribe to both our channels if you would. Thanks for joining us, you guys. Fun as always. Hang in there. We're almost there. Forever and always go Hawks. I'm Dan. That's Bryce. Thanks for watching, you guys.